Jake Thompson wasn't having the best day. It was just another slow morning at the electronics store where he worked as a sales associate. He was barely paying attention to the customers around him, scrolling through his phone in a desperate attempt to pass the time. Sales had been slow lately, and Jake was frustrated with the monotony of his job. He had no passion for it, just the paycheck. His attitude toward customers was often impatient, and today he was about to meet someone who would change his outlook on life forever. The bell above the door jingled as an elderly woman walked into the store. Her movements were slow, and she leaned heavily on a cane. Her face, though kind, showed the years of wear and tear life had placed on her. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat and had a soft, almost fragile presence. Jake glanced up unimpressed and gave her a quick once-over. Another elderly customer looking for something they can't understand, he thought, rolling his eyes. "Can I help you with something, Mum?" Jake asked, his voice flat and detached. His tone was dismissive, as if he'd already decided she would be a bother. The woman smiled warmly, but didn't immediately respond. Instead, she looked around the store, her eyes lingering on the phones, displayed on the shelves. Jake sighed impatiently, glancing at the clock. The last thing he needed was to help someone who didn't know what they wanted. "Are you looking for a new phone?" he asked, raising an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I need something simple. My old phone is giving me trouble." Jake smirked internally. Simple? Yeah, right. He had already decided that helping her would be a waste of time. He didn't have the patience to explain how smartphones work to someone who probably didn't even know how to send a text message. "Well, we have a lot of options," he said, turning toward the display. "But, if you're not tech-savvy, I'm not sure you'll be able to use most of these." His words were sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. He just wanted to get her out of the store. As Jake turned to grab a basic model off the shelf, the elderly woman looked at him with a calm, almost knowing expression. "I'm sure you could help me," she said gently, her voice warm but firm. "But I think you might be underestimating me." Jake didn't think much of it and handed her the phone, his eyes already drifting back to his phone. But then, something strange happened. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn photo. She handed it to him without a word. Jake took the photo, barely glancing at it. His eyes froze when he saw the image. The man in the photo, young, smiling and familiar, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "No way." "That's my son," she said softly, noticing the shock on Jake's face. "His name is Keanu Reeves." The words hung in the air as Jake's world suddenly felt like it was spinning. He had been rude to this woman, not knowing who she really was. She wasn't just any elderly customer. She was the mother of one of the most famous actors in the world. Before Jake could respond, she smiled again. "I'll let you think about that. Now could you help me with this phone?" In that moment, Jake realized just how wrong he had been. And the story was only just beginning. What would you do if you were in Jake's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for the rest of the story. Things are about to get really interesting. Jake Thompson had never thought much about his life. He was a 24-year-old guy working a dead-end job at an electronics store, just scraping by. His dreams of becoming a successful entrepreneur or a famous musician had faded long ago, replaced by the stark reality of needing to pay bills and barely getting by. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't exactly fulfilled either. His life revolved around routine. Wake up, work, go home, repeat. He had no real connection with anyone, not even his co-workers. Jake was just there. Jake's family was another story. He had grown up in a single-parent household with a mom who did her best to raise him, but they were never close. His mom, a kind-hearted woman, was constantly busy working multiple jobs to support their small family. There was always food on the table, but Jake never really felt like he had a close bond with her. They had never shared deep conversations about life or the future, and when Jake left for college, he felt even more distant from her. The two would exchange polite phone calls every few weeks, but nothing more. His mother never expected anything from him, but Jake could tell she wanted more from their relationship. He just couldn't find the time or the energy to invest. But that wasn't the case with Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who had just walked into the store. As Jake stared at the photograph she handed him, his mind raced. Keanu Reeves. Her son. Jake could hardly believe it. The woman standing in front of him, so humble and quiet, was Keanu Reeves's mother? The very same Keanu who had starred in movies like The Matrix and John Wick? It didn't make sense. He had been so rude to her, dismissive, assuming she was just another elderly lady who needed his help with technology. Mrs. Harper must have noticed the look of disbelief on his face because she spoke up again, her voice soft and calm. "People have a tendency to think I'm just a regular old woman," she said, her eyes sparkling with something Jake couldn't quite place. "And I let them think that. I don't like to draw attention to myself. But my son, he's always been different." Jake's confusion only deepened. This sweet, unassuming woman was the mother of one of the world's most famous actors? It didn't seem possible. Keanu was known for his humility and kindness, yet here was his mother, acting in the same unpretentious way. Jake felt ashamed of his earlier judgment. "I'm sorry," Jake muttered, still staring at the photo in his hands. "I had no idea. I didn't mean to." Mrs. Harper smiled gently, cutting him off before he could finish. "It's all right, Jake. I know you didn't mean any harm. You're just doing your job. But sometimes people forget that we all have stories. And sometimes those stories are more than meets the eye." Jake looked down at the photo again. It was an older picture, one that looked like it was taken years ago. Keanu, smiling widely, stood beside a younger version of Mrs. Harper. There was something so real and genuine in their expressions, like a snapshot of a simpler time, before fame and fortune had changed things. Jake suddenly felt a sense of guilt wash over him. He had judged her, and now he saw her in an entirely new light. "Your son must be proud of you," Jake said quietly, unsure of what else to say. Mrs. Harper chuckled softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "Keanu is always proud of me, dear, but it's not about that. We've always kept things simple in our family. What matters is love, understanding, and respect. Those things are the foundation of everything." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't used to hearing someone speak so earnestly about love and respect, let alone from a stranger. It made him realize just how far he had drifted from those values in his own life. He had always been too caught up in his own world, his job, his own self-interest, to appreciate the little things. And here, sitting in front of him, was a woman who had lived through hardships and raised a son who had become an icon. Yet she wasn't interested in the spotlight. She was interested in people, in kindness, in being human. Jake didn't know it yet, but this was the turning point for him. Mrs. Harper wasn't just teaching him about humility. She was teaching him what it truly meant to be a good person. What do you think Jake is learning from Mrs. Harper? Do you agree with her views on love and respect? Leave a comment and let us know. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where things take a surprising turn as Jake's journey of self-discovery begins. Jake wasn't sure what he had expected when Mrs. Harper first walked into the store, but it definitely wasn't this. The morning had started out like any other, with him rolling his eyes at another slow, dull customer. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something bigger than himself. Her quiet dignity and the weight of her words had unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. As the morning wore on, Jake tried to get back to his usual routine, but his mind kept drifting back to Mrs. Harper and the photo she had shown him. Keanu Reeves, Keanu's mum. He thought again, almost in disbelief. He tried to convince himself it was no big deal. After all, what did it matter if she was the mother of a celebrity? She was still just an elderly woman, right? But the longer Jake thought about it, the more uncomfortable he felt with how he had treated her. His earlier dismissal of her had seemed so small and unimportant, but now it felt like an unforgivable mistake. And the worst part? He hadn't even apologized for it. He had merely muttered a half-hearted apology, then moved on. As the clock ticked by, Mrs. Harper continued to browse the store, her movements slow and deliberate, occasionally glancing at Jake, waiting for him to speak. He knew he should approach her again, offer a genuine apology, but something was holding him back. Maybe it was his pride, or maybe it was the fear that any attempt to make things right would just make things worse. But then, just as he was beginning to think he could let the whole thing slide, she approached him again. "Jake," she said, her voice soft but firm. She looked up at him with a calm smile that made him feel small. "You seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Jake froze. He hadn't expected her to call him out so directly. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? I'm sorry for how I treated you earlier," he finally managed to say, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "I was rude, and I should have been more patient with you. You didn't deserve that." Mrs. Harper studied him for a moment, her eyes kind and understanding. "Jake, you are young, and sometimes we all forget the things that matter most. You're not the first person to treat me that way, and you won't be the last. But I do hope you'll take a moment to think about what you value in people." She paused for a moment, her gaze shifting to the phones on display. "It's easy to judge others by their appearance or by what you think you know about them, but real worth is found beneath the surface." Her words stung, but Jake knew she wasn't just talking about him. She was talking about the way he had lived his life, quick to judge, quick to dismiss. He had always assumed the worst in people, especially when it came to his job. It wasn't that he hated people, but he had grown indifferent to their needs and emotions. It was easier that way, but Mrs. Harper wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't just some random customer. She was Keanu Reeves's mother, and despite all her wealth and connection to fame, she was as humble and patient as anyone he'd ever met. Maybe, just maybe, Jake was starting to realize that it wasn't about the money or the status someone had. It was about the kind of person they were. And Mrs. Harper was the kind of person who would never let fame cloud her values. Jake looked at her, feeling both shame and admiration. "I'll try to remember that," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "Good," she replied with a smile. "You're already starting to understand." But just as the tension between them began to fade, something unexpected happened. Jake's manager, Mike, came around the corner, looking a little too cheerful for the slow sales day. "Jake, could you help out in the back for a minute?" he asked, not even acknowledging Mrs. Harper. His tone was quick and dismissive, as if she were just another customer. "We need to organize the stock and make sure we restock the best sellers." Jake shot a quick glance at Mrs. Harper, who seemed completely unfazed by the abrupt interruption. She gave him a small, knowing smile and took a step back, but it was clear that Mike wasn't paying attention to the subtle tension. His words, though casual, were like a slap to Jake's face. It was the same attitude Jake had adopted for so long, treating customers as inconveniences, not as people. He felt a deep sense of discomfort. Mrs. Harper had been right. He had been wrong all along, treating others like they didn't matter. He nodded at Mike and, without another word, walked into the back room where he found himself pacing back and forth. The walls seemed to close in on him. His life, his choices, his attitude, it was all suddenly so clear. What have I been doing? In the back, he was left alone with his thoughts, thinking about the impact of one simple interaction. Mrs. Harper had entered his life as a quiet, humble customer, but she was teaching him lessons he hadn't even known he needed. And now Jake was facing a reality he could no longer ignore. He had been living a life of shallow judgments, not truly connecting with the people around him. When he walked back to the front of the store, he was determined to make things right with Mrs. Harper, but the moment had passed. She had already left. Jake sighed and stared at the door, feeling the weight of the lesson on his shoulders. It wasn't too late to change, but it was up to him to start. Do you think Jake has learned his lesson? What would you have done differently in his situation? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Jake's journey of growth is just beginning, and things are about to take another unexpected turn. The next few days at the store passed in a haze of routine. Jake couldn't shake the thoughts of Mrs. Harper from his mind. Her quiet wisdom had left a lasting impression on him, and he found himself questioning everything about his life. His job, his relationships, and even his attitude toward the people around him. For the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he was on the brink of something more than just a paycheck. He was beginning to see the world differently, as though his narrow view was expanding, and there was so much more to discover. Then, on the fourth day after Mrs. Harper's visit, Jake found himself in the middle of a chaotic morning shift when everything suddenly changed. The store was busier than usual, and Jake was helping a group of teenagers with their questions about the latest phones. He had grown more patient over the past few days, answering their questions and making small talk with a smile. The change within him was subtle, but it was there. He was trying to be better. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging thought about Mrs. Harper, how she had come into his life, left him with those profound words, and then vanished just as quietly. Then, as if fate were playing its hand, the door chimed, and a familiar face entered the store. Mrs. Harper. Jake's heart skipped a beat. There she was again, looking as calm and serene as ever, a slight smile on her face. But this time something was different. Her eyes seemed more alert, as if she were looking for something specific. She walked through the store with purpose, not just a leisurely stroll like the first time. Jake took a deep breath and made his way toward her, feeling an odd mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice warm. "It's so good to see you again." She turned toward him, and for a moment there was a quiet understanding between them. "I knew I'd find you here, Jake," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I came to see you because there's something I want to talk to you about." Jake blinked, puzzled. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" She smiled, but there was a subtle weight in her gaze. "Actually, yes," she said. "Everything is just fine, but I need your help with something important." Before Jake could respond, she pulled out an envelope from her bag and handed it to him. "I need you to come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." Jake's mind raced. This was unexpected. He had assumed Mrs. Harper was simply dropping by to check on him or chat for a moment. But now she was handing him a mysterious envelope and asking him to meet someone. "Who's the person you want me to meet?" Jake asked cautiously, glancing down at the envelope in his hands. She chuckled softly, as if amused by his curiosity. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. "Just trust me, it's time." The excitement in her voice made Jake feel like something monumental was about to unfold. He felt a sudden sense of anticipation, mixed with confusion. He had no idea what this was about, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that Mrs. Harper was leading him towards something that would change his life forever. "All right," Jake said, nodding, his heart racing. "Let's go." They walked together through the store and out the front door, and Mrs. Harper led him down the street toward a sleek black car parked on the curb. Jake's eyes widened. It wasn't a normal car. It was a high-end vehicle, one that screamed luxury and wealth. His curiosity deepened, but he followed her without asking any more questions. The driver, a tall man in sunglasses, opened the door for them. As they slid into the car, the driver nodded at Mrs. Harper. "The meeting is set," he said without much emotion. Jake sat back, still confused but intrigued. Mrs. Harper turned to him, her expression gentle yet determined. "Jake, this may seem strange, but I promise you, this is important." The car drove, in silence, winding through the city streets, taking turns Jake wasn't familiar with. It was almost like they were driving toward a different world, one that Jake didn't know existed. After a few more minutes, they pulled up to a tall building that stood out in the skyline. The kind of building you only saw in movies. Mrs. Harper led him inside, past gleaming marble floors and polished elevators. They made their way up to a private suite on one of the upper floors. Jake was still trying to process everything, but there was a growing sense of anticipation in the pit of his stomach. When they entered the suite, Jake froze. Standing in front of him, in the center of the room, was none other than Keanu Reeves himself. He was dressed casually, wearing a black t-shirt and jeans, but even in his simplicity, Keanu radiated an aura of quiet confidence. His warm smile and calm demeanor immediately put Jake at ease. "Hey, Jake," Keanu said with a grin. "It's nice to finally meet you." Jake's brain couldn't process the situation. His mouth went dry and he barely managed to stutter. "You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu laughed softly. "I am, but I'm just Keanu. And this is a bit of an unusual situation, I know." Jake turned to Mrs. Harper, his eyes wide with shock. "Wait, are you—" Mrs. Harper nodded, her expression soft and reassuring. "Yes, Jake, this is my son. I told you I had a story to share with you. It's not just about fame or money or any of that." It's about the connections we make and how our choices impact each other. Jake's mind was reeling, but something about Keanu's presence made everything feel more grounded, more real. This wasn't about celebrity. This wasn't about the glitz and glamour. It was about the simple truth that every person, no matter how famous, had a story. And that story, whether simple or complex, was what truly mattered. Keanu looked at him with understanding in his eyes. "We've all been through struggles, Jake," he said. "I know how easy it is to feel lost in a world that pushes us to compete, to judge, to ignore what's real. But my mom, she's the one who's always reminded me of the things that really matter." Jake took a deep breath, realizing that in front of him stood two people who had seen it all, the fame, the wealth, the scrutiny. But they still held on to something deeper. They had shown him that the key to everything was connection. It was about respect, kindness, and love. And Jake, he was ready to change, for good. What do you think about Jake's meeting with Keanu and Mrs. Harper? What would you do in his shoes? Leave a comment below. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss what happens next, as Jake takes the next step in his incredible journey. Jake stood in stunned silence, still processing everything that had just happened. He had just walked into a room with Keanu Reeves, the Keanu Reeves, sitting calmly in front of him, his mother beside him, both of them looking at Jake as if this was all part of some bigger plan. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression still warm but now focused. "You've been through some stuff, haven't you, Jake?" Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. It felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from at any moment. I don't even know where to start," he muttered. "This is just crazy." Mrs. Harper, still standing beside him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to be overwhelmed," she said softly. "What matters is where you go from here." Keanu smiled, his eyes gleaming with the same quiet understanding that his mother had shown Jake. "You know, Jake, I've had my fair share of moments where I felt lost. It's easy to get caught up in everything that doesn't really matter. The fame, the expectations, the hustle for the next big thing. But the truth is, none of that makes us who we are. Who we are is shaped by the choices we make, by the people we choose to be and the relationships we foster. And those choices often come down to simple things: love, respect, kindness." Jake's chest tightened as Keanu spoke. Every word seemed to hit him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had spent years floating through life, numb to the simple, fundamental things that really made life worth living. He had always been too focused on the wrong things, on money, on success, on being better than the next guy. But now, hearing Keanu's words, something began to shift within him. He wasn't just standing in a room with a celebrity. He was standing in front of someone who had lived through the same kinds of struggles he had. Someone who understood the weight of feeling lost and uncertain. "Mrs. Harper," Jake began, his voice faltering slightly, "you said there was a lesson you wanted to teach me. I think I'm starting to understand." Mrs. Harper's eyes twinkled with pride, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, Jake. The lesson is simple, but it's powerful. It's about connection, about understanding that the people around us, whether they're famous or just ordinary folks, deserve our respect, our patience, our kindness. It's easy to judge based on what we see on the surface, but the truth is, we're all just human. We all carry our own stories, our own struggles. We're all trying to make our way through the world the best we can." Jake's heart swelled as her words sank in deeper. It was like a weight had been lifted from his chest, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was seeing things with clarity. The small things, the smiles, the gestures, the quiet moments of connection were what mattered, and he had wasted so much of his life focusing on the wrong things. Keanu leaned forward, his gaze locking with Jake's. "I want you to think about something," he said, his voice calm but intense. "What kind of man do you want to be, Jake? The kind who lets life pass by, who goes through the motions, or the kind who stands up for what matters, who chooses love over indifference, who respects the people around him and builds meaningful connections?" Jake's chest tightened at the question, the weight of it sinking deep into his bones. He didn't have all the answers yet, but something within him knew that this was the moment that would define him. He could keep living the way he had, apathetic, detached, focused on the wrong things, or he could choose something better. "I want to be the kind of man who chooses love," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to make the kind of difference that matters. I want to connect with people, not just brush them aside like I've been doing." Keanu smiled, the same warm, genuine smile that had always seemed to melt the hearts of everyone he met. "Good, because that's the first step. It's all about choosing to see the good in people, to show them respect, and to live with a heart open to the world. And you're already on your way." For a moment the room was quiet. It was as if time had slowed and all that mattered was the unspoken understanding between the three of them. Jake realized that this moment was the beginning of something new, something he hadn't known he needed, but something that was now the foundation for the rest of his life. Mrs. Harper spoke up once more, her voice tender yet firm. "Jake, don't be too hard on yourself for the way you've been. Life has a way of pushing us down paths we don't always understand. But the important thing is that you're here now. You're awake, and you have the power to change." Jake nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude toward her and toward Keanu. Thank you both. I didn't even know how lost I was until now." Keanu reached out and gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You're not alone, Jake. None of us are. And the journey, it's always going to be about growth. You just have to keep moving forward." As the conversation continued, Jake felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. And he knew that no matter what came next, he wasn't going to let it pass him by. He was going to live with purpose, with love, and with a newfound respect for every person he met along the way. What would you do if you had the chance to meet someone like Keanu or Mrs. Harper? What impact has this chapter had on your perspective? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part of Jake's journey. Things are about to get even more exciting as he takes on new challenges with a renewed spirit. The days following Jake's unexpected meeting with Keanu and Mrs. Harper were a blur of reflection, change, and self-discovery. His work life at the store took on a new meaning, and the way he interacted with customers, especially the older ones, the ones he used to dismiss so easily, was different. His heart had opened in ways he hadn't thought possible. Where once he might have brushed off an elderly customer's questions, now he listened intently, making sure they felt heard. He treated every person that walked through the door as someone who mattered regardless of their age, appearance, or status. One afternoon, a regular customer, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, came into the store. She had been coming to the shop for years, always with a smile and a pleasant word. Jake had always given her the bare minimum, just enough to get through the transaction. But today, as he greeted her, something in him shifted. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins," he said with a genuine smile. "How are you today?" Mrs. Jenkins looked up at him with a twinkle in her eye. "Better now that you're smiling, dear," she replied, taking her time to make eye contact. Jake felt a warmth spread through him. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sincerity, "and I realize I've never really taken the time to appreciate the people who come in here. Not just as customers, but as people. You've been coming here for years, and I never really asked how you were doing. I'm sorry about that." Mrs. Jenkins' eyes softened, and she patted his hand gently. "You're a good boy, Jake. Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. Don't worry too much about what's in the past. What matters is what you do now." Her words struck Jake like a bell ringing in the silence of his heart. He realized that Mrs. Jenkins was right. Life was full of moments like this, moments when you could choose to change, to be better, to make things right. It wasn't about dwelling on the mistakes of the past. It was about what you could do with the present. And in that moment, Jake had made a choice. He would live with purpose, with gratitude, and with a sense of connection to those around him. Later that evening, after closing the store, Jake sat in his small apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. His mind wandered back to the day he met Keanu and Mrs. Harper. The way Keanu had spoken to him, with such wisdom and simplicity, had been a wake-up call. The truth Keanu had shared with him, that the connections we make with others are what truly matter in life, had finally sunk in. Jake had been running on autopilot for so long. He had been driven by a need for approval, a need to be better than others, to chase after things that didn't truly fulfill him. But now, he saw the world differently. He didn't need to be the best. He needed to be present. He needed to show up for the people in his life, to treat them with kindness and respect. As he reflected, Jake found himself pulling out his phone and scrolling through his contacts. There were several people he had lost touch with over the years, people he had been too busy to really connect with. He began sending messages, simple ones at first, a text to his sister asking how she was, a call to an old friend, apologizing for the times he had been too distant. He wanted to start rebuilding the bridges he had burned, even if they seemed insignificant at the time. Just as he was about to send a text to a former colleague, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Mrs. Harper. "Jake, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to check in on you. I know the changes you've been making aren't easy, but you're doing great. Remember, it's all about the small steps. Keep moving forward." Jake smiled as he read the message. It felt like a small hug from across the distance, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this journey. He typed back quickly, "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I'm really starting to understand what you and Keanu were trying to teach me. It's like my eyes have opened to a whole new world. I'm trying every day to be better. I'm so grateful for the lessons you've shared." Almost immediately, her response came through. "You've always had it in you, Jake. I knew it. Keep going. And remember, life isn't just about achieving things, it's about making connections. Those will be the moments you remember, the ones that matter the most." Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't have everything figured out, and he certainly wasn't perfect, but he had learned something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. The most important thing was love. Love for himself, for others, and for the journey ahead. Later. That week, Jake was walking through the park near his apartment when he spotted an elderly man sitting on a bench feeding some pigeons. Without thinking, Jake approached him and sat down. They struck up a conversation, and Jake found himself asking questions, genuinely interested in the man's stories. For the first time, he wasn't focused on the clock, on his phone, or on getting somewhere. He was just present. He was just there, listening, connecting. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Jake realized something profound. The world didn't need him to be perfect. It didn't need him to be the best salesman or the fastest or the smartest. It just needed him to be human, to connect, to care. In the weeks that followed, Jake continued to build new relationships, some small, some large. He reached out to people he had once neglected, including his parents, who he hadn't spoken to in months. His connections with customers grew deeper, more meaningful, and he found joy in helping others. His job no longer felt like just a paycheck. It felt like a way to give back, to be part of something greater than himself. And all the while, Jake kept Mrs. Harper's and Keanu's words close to his heart, living each day with a renewed sense of purpose. The world was bigger than he had ever imagined. There were people to meet, stories to hear, and love to give, and he was ready to embrace it all. If you had the chance to change your perspective on life, what would you do differently? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in Jake's journey. There's always more to learn, more to grow, and more connections to be made. Jake's transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. It wasn't long before people began commenting on the change in him. His co-workers, friends, even strangers. The kindness he'd started showing others, the genuine interest he took in their lives was beginning to spread, like ripples in a pond. It started with a small gesture. One afternoon at work, a new customer walked into the store. She seemed frazzled, juggling a baby in her arms and a bag full of groceries in the other hand. Jake immediately noticed the stress on her face. "Can I help you with anything today?" he asked, stepping toward her with a soft smile. She looked at him with a sigh of relief. "I'm just trying to get a few things and get out of here quickly. My baby's been fussy all day, and it's been a long one." Jake nodded, understanding. He gently offered to carry her groceries to the counter, and then took the time to pack everything with care. The whole process didn't take more than a few minutes, but the gratitude in her eyes as she thanked him spoke volumes. As she left the store, she turned to him one last time. "Thank you for making my day a little easier. Not everyone would have helped me like that." Jake smiled and waved her off. "I'm just glad I could help. Have a good day." The encounter might have seemed insignificant to anyone watching, but for Jake, it was another step in the process of becoming the man he wanted. To be someone who looked beyond himself to truly serve others. He didn't expect anything in return, but the small moments like that one had a way of feeding his soul. As the days went on, he began to see that his new approach to life wasn't just improving his own perspective. It was having a positive impact on those around him. The same co-workers who had once seen him as nothing more than a store employee were now engaging with him more. They noticed how much more present and compassionate he was, how much more willing he was to listen. And it wasn't just his attitude that changed, it was his whole demeanor. Jake had learned to slow down, to be in the moment, to appreciate people for who they were, not what they could do for him or what they represented. And in return, he felt more connected to the world around him. One afternoon, Mrs. Harper came into the store again, walking, slowly with a cane, but still with the same grace and wisdom that had captivated Jake the first time he met her. As she approached the counter, Jake stood up and greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Harper, it's so good to see you," he said, genuinely happy to see her. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with approval. "You've been busy, I see," she said, "and I hear you've been making a real difference here." Jake felt a slight blush rise to his cheeks. "I've just been trying to do the right thing," he said, humbled. "You were right. It's about connection, about showing up for people." She nodded, placing a hand over his. "You've got it, Jake, and I'm proud of you. You've learned the most important lesson of all. It's never too late to change, to grow, and to make a difference in the world around you. You're already changing lives, even when you don't realize it." Her words filled him with a warmth he couldn't quite explain. For the first time in his life, Jake felt that he was exactly where he needed to be. He no longer needed the validation of others to feel good about himself. He had found something much more valuable, the power to make a difference in the lives of the people around him. As the days passed, Jake found himself thinking about his conversation with Keanu once more. He had learned from both of them the lesson that love, respect, and kindness were not just words but ways of living, and these values had become the foundation for how he viewed the world and his place in it. One evening, he received a message from an old friend, a text he hadn't expected. It read, "Jake, I've noticed a change in you lately. You seem different, more patient, more understanding. What's going on?" Jake smiled as he read the message. It felt good to know that his transformation was visible to others. He typed back quickly, "Just trying to be a better person. It's been a journey, but it feels right." The friend responded with a simple, heartfelt reply, "I'm proud of you, Jake. Keep it up." Jake leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the city streets below. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain: he was no longer the man he used to be. And that in itself was enough. The ripple effect continued to spread beyond the walls of the store, beyond the small interactions with customers, and into the lives of the people Jake cared about. He began to feel the true power of connection. With every kind word, every gesture of help, every conversation that went beyond the surface, he was building something lasting. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about living with integrity, with compassion, and with a desire to help others in whatever small way he could. As he had learned from Keanu and Mrs. Harper, the moments that truly mattered weren't the big achievements. They were the quiet, everyday moments that made life worth living. And as Jake reflected on all that had happened, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had crossed his path. Without them, he might still be lost, chasing after things that would never satisfy him. But now, with a heart open to the world, he was beginning to see the beauty in the connections he was making. He wasn't just living for himself anymore. He was living for others too. How do you think the small moments in life shape who we are? Can you think of a moment where a simple act of kindness made a difference in your life? Share your thoughts with us below. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next part of Jake's journey. Who knows where it will lead? But one thing is for sure, he'll continue to grow, continue to connect, and continue to inspire.